Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you're watching. Welcome to another episode of the Society of Shady Characters. Today we have our good friend Jacob Mulcahy joining us to talk about his faith journey, kind of his leadership experience of leading Catholic communities in college, and to just talk all things the Catholic faith. So let's get started. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy
Holy
Mary,
Mary, Mother of
Mother of
God,
God, pray
pray
for
for us
us
sinners,
sinners,
now and at the
now
hour
and
of
at
our
the
death.
hour.
Maybe we need to just have you do the whole thing through next time, Ryan.
Just the whole prayer.
It's hard to coincide three voices over the internet.
Yeah,
It is what it is.
it is what it is. Okay, Jacob, just for people who don't know, can you kind of walk us through your faith journey, talk about your early faith formation and how that kind of impacted you and set you up for your college faith experience?
Yeah, so I was born and raised Catholic into a great Catholic family. The three siblings, two parents with a beautiful marriage, and so I definitely had that support structure of my faith. And I went to a Catholic elementary school and then switched over to public school, but just got that catechesis early on, so I knew some of the questions that other people didn't know there. But pretty typical upbringing from a Catholic family. Till around high school, as kind of when I started getting involved in a youth group on my own and really beginning to make the faith my own. I say beginning because I was, still somewhat wayward in high school, but allowed me to at least get to the point where when I was leaving high school and going out on my own in college, I knew that my faith was going to be important to me and that wherever I ended up, I was going to attempt to continue to make it my own and continue to grow in my faith.
Nice. What was your experience like going to Catholic elementary school?
I have fond memories from it. I feel like the picture of Catholic private school is normally like, nice things, rich people and everything like that, but it was kind of a lower end school. We didn't have the best facilities necessarily or anything like that, but really good people there and really faithful teachers. I remember even still that doing the Lord's work, dealing with little 10-year-old Jacob.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes, like you said, there's the image of what people think Catholic school is like, and I think also just by diocese to diocese basis, you maybe get some stronger education systems, some stronger Catholic schools, and some weaker ones. Do you feel like where on that kind of scale did you feel like your faith education was, and maybe separate from that, your actual normal, let's see, general education?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty young, so
Yeah,
it's
fair
hard to
enough.
say for sure, but the one thing I will say is I remember going from, elementary school where I wasn't really in like a RE or a faith formation like a Sunday school with my parish because I went to that Catholic school and that was kind of, we had religion class. And whenever we switched to public school as my whole family, my siblings switched over to public school and we started doing the religious education through our parish, it was very noticeable that, just some basics of the faith prayers, Our Father, Hail Mary, Glory be, like things like that. You'd be surprised that a lot of kids just don't know those, even, early high school years. So when you're talking like preparing for confirmation and stuff like that, those are kind of somewhat formative years in your Catholic formation. I do feel like I had a huge step up on just having a knowledge of the faith, which is important more in the sense that it's a knowledge of where to find answers or where to look for answers when you do have questions in the future. Yeah, the education itself was as good as any other elementary, as far as I remember.
Thank you.
So you talked about how in your high school years you kind of joined faith a faith young adults group on your own. Can you kind of just walk us through what led you to do that, and then how and what you took away from it?
Yeah, a few things led me to it. I was always a pretty good kid. I was staying out of trouble. I wasn't doing anything too bad. Just going to church and religious education and stuff, and having a bunch of friends in the programs kind of drew me in. And once I kind of got in, just they always have the pizza and soda pops, and that's what gets you in the door. But then the I don't know what the position is, the guy in charge of the religious education program for like the high school formation. His name is Randy. He was an incredibly faithful man of God who is just so he was so holy to me, and it was so clear right away that like whatever this guy's saying, I need to like take his advice and listen to whatever he's saying. So he definitely turned it from something in that was just a thing to do, on a weeknight to go hang out with some friends at church and do some things into something that actually began into like a journey of faith. And he mentored me a lot all through high school and even since. I'll say too, one thing that he did is he recognized a couple of us weren't really gaining much from some of the religious education classes that we had to attend as part of our confirmation program. And so that year he let me and a group of just 3 or 4 other people meet with a mentor that we had chosen, like an instructor, a teacher. And that led to such incredibly deep conversations because the people in the group were going through some pretty rough times and some big questions were being asked. And with that mentor who was part of that group, Chris, he was also incredible and definitely just gave me an image of holiness and faithfulness that I thought was doable and thought was beautiful.
What were some of the like either the best lesson that you think kind of came out of those years, or maybe some of the more important ones that stuck with you or still stick with you to this day? If you could get into that.
Yeah, I think the biggest lessons I was learning in high school was that the image of holiness that I might have in my head based off whatever books or people I'm looking up to or whatever is not necessarily what God has for me, and that indeed the path of holiness and my sanctification is exactly what God has for me. And so that came to there's in high school I was discerning the priesthood, discerning married life, um, dating and doing some seminary visits and all this. And I just kind of had stuck in my head that if I wanted to be a saint, I had to go be a priest, maybe even a monk, and dedicate my life to all those things. And high school was kind of a learning period for me of God took me out of that and said, whatever his will is for me is the best place for me. And so the best thing I can do with my life is follow his will, which in my case was being married, going to not to seminary but to USAFA, and then getting married after that and finding my path of holiness in the life that he's actually called me to.
Saint Joan of Arc kind of mentions that silence is a um, necessary component of hearing God's word for us and what God wants us to do with our lives. Could you kind of talk about how or maybe you found something different helps, but could you talk about whether it's silence or what kind of led you through that discernment period in your high school phase?
No, I think silence is absolutely key. And just that prayer of sitting with God and, you know, all types of prayer have their place and spiritual books and spiritual content, all that is very good, but you don't come to know God's will unless you're sitting with him and listening. And so that was key for me in high school. Was toward the end, maybe my senior year of high school, was when I was introduced to concepts like a holy hour and just adoration. And that wasn't things that I had done before, but doing that with low frequency in high school, but more consistency as I got older definitely helped me to bring myself and my faith out of myself a little bit, and not just learning my faith, but actually sitting and listening to what God has, and to come to know God in the silence.
I know you mentioned that during the discernment process, you often may have felt pressure to go one way or another on the basis of what you thought you needed to do to become holier or to become a saint. Did you ever maybe feel pressure that maybe because you felt more self-aware or that you knew that you were discerning at a younger age and you kind of had an idea of this search between maybe being called to the priesthood or maybe being called to marriage, did you ever feel pressured that by the mere nature of you being aware of that discerning process so young, felt like it was inherently pushing you one way?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember sitting down in high school after I had gone on my first seminary visit with that mentor, Randy, I was talking about earlier, and I was just kind of losing it, breaking down because I didn't know for sure what I wanted, but I just had other young men in my life, like my brother, my older brother, for example, who, you know, it was very clear to him that he did not want to be a priest, and so it was very, very much the case for me that I thought, why would God put this inkling of a desire, and why would He put me in this position if He didn't want me to be a priest? Because I saw priesthood as that objectively higher vocation, and in a sense it is. But that's what I was saying earlier. That process of coming to learn that whatever vocation God wants is the one that's objectively higher for me personally. So I definitely felt that pressure. I'm sure a lot of young guys do, but even the funny thing is the only people who kind of didn't share that opinion were the seminarians I would go and talk to on these visits, which was super helpful because they would talk about, they wouldn't even consider themselves as future priests. They would say, yeah, I'm in seminary and Lord willing, I'll become a priest. And talking to them and just hearing how their experience of seminary wasn't even preparation for priesthood as much as continued discernment of their vocation, and how they spoke so highly of married and family life. Those things kind of gently drew me out of it in the end.
Yeah, that's something I can relate to because I remember when I was kind of going through that back and forth in my head in high school as well. I felt like kind of like you just said, like why would I feel even like half a desire to maybe go down that path if I wasn't being called that way because it doesn't seem like everybody else was struggling with this balance and it's stuff like that. Or even I've talked to some of my friends that like they would just attend church on a day other than Sunday, and all of the old women of the church would flock to them and be like, "Oh, you must be called to be a priest. You're so holy." And it's like it's a weird pressure that like it doesn't it's not necessarily there, but it just feels like since I'm thinking about it or since other people think like it could be, then I must be because I feel abnormal to feel that way.
Yeah, no, that I feel like that's a universal experience if you go to daily mass as a young man. Is some grandma's gonna come and tell you that, and I think there's the reason for that's probably I think a lot of times too. Only like 3% or something like that of canonized saints or blesseds are married or non-religious priests or religious, and so there's a good reason for that. And even as a married man or a single man, you can look up to priests and religious for models of virtue and faithfulness. But there is a lack of that image of a super holy, either single guy or married man with a family outside of your own family, which I did have thankfully in my own family, but still there's not quite as much to go off of looking out for that. So
Yeah, and I'm sure Ryan, I know you got a question loaded in the chamber, but I just wanted to touch on something you said about that. I actually heard a priest one time gave the point of view that a vocation isn't a call from married life into the priesthood. He was trying to make the case that it was actually a call to marriage from the priesthood. And he made it as the case of if we're all called to live holy lives, and by living the life of a monk or a priest, like a religious who's dedicated their life to religion and to study and to prayer, then that would hypothetically be the quickest and easiest route to holiness. So, if anything, you're being called out of that to do something otherwise. So, I just thought that was an interesting point that usually is kind of the opposite of how people think about it.
yeah, no, that's beautiful. I love that.
Jacob, you once told me, I remember this. You once told me that you think every man should discern. And since the Catholic Church is kind of going through this period of like lower vocations to the priesthood, what do you think the Catholic Church could do better to draw men into discernment?
Yeah, I do think every young man should consider it. I think there's no harm in every young man going on a seminary visit, even stuff like that. It's hard because it's something that people identify as so young that they don't want to do that at all, and there's no desire. And sometimes that's the case, but I think it starts with getting getting young men involved in their faith in really deep ways and asking that questions of themselves a little younger maybe. I know a lot of guys kind of struggle to find their faith until later. The high school and college years are a bit chaotic sometimes. But the other thing I would say is we got to get out and talk to some young priests because they're out there and they're awesome to talk to, super inspirational and super, you know, just fun to hang out with. And I think being with a priest who is fun to hang out with and that you can develop a sense of friendship with, as well as that spiritual direction relationship with, I think that would do quite a bit for helping men see the beauty of the priesthood, that can come with that vocation. I think of a priest there's a Catholic summer camp I would go to every summer for a week, and there was this priest who was in his low, like no older than 35, so a pretty young guy. And he was a football player in college, so he was absolutely huge. And he would just come and throw a football around with us, talk to us, and hang out with us. And when you have a priest that can be that relational and talk to the young people and you know give them that sense of security to ask questions about the priesthood and about their own faith, that does wonders. And even me, that I think is probably why I was so drawn to the priesthood earlier on.
Yeah, like if I could, I've thought about this a little bit. If I could toss my feelings on this, it's like we also just need to get priests in the active part of the community more because I feel like you get the image of the priesthood being I'm going to be at a church. I'm just going to hang out in the rectory or whatever. I'm just going to go to this and that and I'll just do mass every day and it's kind of like perceived as a lame lifestyle. But I mean, for instance, we have the model of St. John Bosco. He'd like go out in the streets of Italy and like play games with kids and basically be like, "Hey, I'll do this, I'll do this dumb thing with you, but if I win, you come to church with me." And just like get out in the community, be active, or whether that's on mission trip, whether that's just in your local community. I just feel like sometimes we have this image, especially as young people and especially as young men who frequently just want to run around and play games, that the priesthood is just like this dull lifestyle, and it doesn't have to be, and it in many ways shouldn't be. And that's how I feel about it personally.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Transitioning to your time in college, could you talk about your experiences leading a men's group, Exodus 90, and your active participation in events like Spire and retreats? What did you mainly learn from that, and what called you to do that?
Yeah, I kind of drew from my own experience in high school and kind of what I saw there, and then also my freshman year of college. Of There's all these people who were raised in their faith, even come from pretty good Catholic families and were raised in the faith, went to church every Sunday, and then they get to college and they show up to church and they now have a decision to make, and that's to make their faith their own or to abandon the faith. And I remember my freshman year at the academy, I knew the right thing to do was to go to mass on Sundays and to go to whatever youth group they had, so Spire for the academy. And I did not make any friends like my entire freshman year. I did make one, I guess, by the end, but I went there and people couldn't remember my name, and I sat alone at mass and everything like that. And I felt that weight kind of on me in a sense that I remember in high school that I felt like I was popular at the youth group and I was going because all my friends were there. And then we could kind of get drawn into the content from there. But in college, it was the opposite. And that kind of triggered something in me. It's a desire to take people who were raised in the faith, but really don't know the faith, and it's not their own faith yet. And to put myself in a position with them where I can kind of help walk them along that journey that I found so much joy in. And so kind of my sophomore year, I decided to try and get involved and to start some things and really look for those people who were nominally Catholic, were raised Catholic, and didn't have any problems with the faith, but had no faith of their own particularly. And I really tried to focus on that kind of young man and just be there to ask them some questions about their to try and get them to make their faith their own. And I definitely grew so much in those years myself. I Once I started kind of leading some things, I really realized that I needed to be in a place where I could have some sort of moral authority, and you got to practice what you preach, so to say. So that led to a ton of fruit in my spiritual life, especially in some formative years there in the middle of college. So I definitely still today feel that my ministry is kind of focused on some men around my age, typically, who just need someone to help them make their faith their own, and ask those questions, and just trust that there's answers and that there's beauty in the Catholic Church.
Were some of the things that slowly drew you away from being the quiet kid who sat at mass by himself and went to Spire and didn't like people didn't really maybe know your name or remember, and how did you transform that into what Ryan and I knew by the time you were a junior, which was like you were in not necessarily like head honcho per se, but you were very well established and everyone knew who you were.
Yeah, I don't think it's a point specifically, but I do remember summer break when between freshman and sophomore year, I met with some of my high school mentors when I was back home visiting family, and I it just hit me when I was back home and speaking with them, especially, that it was easy for me in high school because it was just a friend group for me. And the realization that hit me was just, who do we leave out in high school? And I just kept thinking, because I felt like I was being excluded from this group. And there's no ill will to any of the people who were my upperclassmen at the time. They were awesome, and they were very, they're very kind and very faithful themselves. But I just had this moment where I kind of all the people flashed through my mind of the people who would come week in and week out, but maybe I never really quite learned their names, or maybe I never invited them into some of the games that we were playing with my friend group, or some of the activities outside of the general, the weekly schedule. Who did I exclude in that? And that really kind of just pulled on my heart to to at least give it a go and to try and get involved one more time and see if I could do that for someone else, what I failed to do in high school.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I would definitely say you helped make my faith my own in college. I think it helped that you lived a few doors down from me, and just like were very authentic in your faith. How would you recommend that people of the faith can help bring fellow Catholics back into the church and make their faith their own?
Yeah. I think something that happens a lot is, if you are living in a way that you're just not hiding your faith becomes evident to people pretty quickly, especially the people who are raised Catholic. They'll be able to identify, oh, they'll say I'm Catholic. And that for me is like the most common and obvious point to just be like, "Oh, are you?" And then ask a few questions like, "Are you practicing? Like, are you going to church?" And then the answer is no to that. Invite them to church or invite them to something else. And if you have a relationship like that, the other thing that I feel like is super helpful is immediately start kind of identifying some misconceptions, or, you know, things they might not have quite right about the faith, and maybe people were raised Catholic, and by that they mean they went to Mass on Christmas and Easter and received the sacraments sometimes. And so that type of person, a lot of time, will have Catholic as part of their identity, which is a good thing. It is part of their identity, but they're having a lot of gaps in what the faith is, what the church teaches. And I think when you start kind of poking around at questions about their faith, what they believe, and stuff like that, and then start sharing the truth of the faith and the truth of Christianity with them, then that just naturally, I think it speaks for itself. You don't have to do too much, and the Holy Spirit can kind of start stirring that desire for truth and for beauty and goodness in them. And so those are, I mean, I've seen that countless times. It's always people who are raised in the faith and they'll say, "Oh, I'm Catholic," and they're basically asking you to show them what it looks like to be holy in 2025, which is not easy, but it's possible.
Yeah, I think we came across a quote by Saint Francis of Assisi that it was something to the effect of preach the gospel at all times when what was it? I just had it. Preach the gospel at all times. When necessary, use your words. That's what it was. Do you feel like that kind of fits what you were just getting at with like sometimes you just have to well, for the instance of what you said in high school, like who did you exclude out of just by being friends? So who did you miss with that? And at college, like maybe you were around people that were at varying levels of their faith, but because you didn't quite know them or they didn't know you that you couldn't really interact with them. And do you feel like maybe that kind of rings true in what you've just said, like you need to meet people and talk to people and get to know them and hang out and make it like a friend group like you had in high school before you can go just spreading the word.
Yeah, I honestly didn't really believe that type of thing for a number of years between high school and college. I got the advice from a lot of spiritual directors that you don't necessarily need to even go out and be super deliberate in evangelizing. You living your faith and just being a witness to it will attract people. And I definitely didn't believe that, and I thought there was no way that's true. But then the older I've gotten, the more I realized it is the case, and especially for the people who I feel like God's put on my heart most is we'll call fallen away Catholics, or maybe just people who aren't as alive in their faith as they can be. That's absolutely true. Is people are looking for someone to give them the confidence to be able to say like, no, like this is something you can give your whole life to and surrender to God and to completely try and be a saint. And like that's not a weird thing to do. That's not You're not crazy for thinking that and to aspiring to that. And I think that's huge. I think a big part of evangelizing is friendship and relationship. You can never convince someone of truth if you don't love them and they don't know that you love them. I think whether it is the more subtle witness of your life or very deliberate evangelism, either way, it's got to come with friendship and it's got to come with sincerity because people can smell that from a mile away if you're not being authentic. Easier said than done.
I would say one of the most authentic Catholics I have ever met is Father Foley. What was the most important thing that you learned from Father Foley during your time in college?
Yeah, for all this talk we were saying earlier about the young priests and how seeing them is so essential for young men. Having a priest who was older than my dad and could really feel that father role and that spiritual fatherhood was so important to me at that time in my life. Father Foley, I completely agree, is absolutely incredible. Things that he taught me is man, he was so genuine. He was so himself, and there's a kind of a confidence and a humility about him that I thought was just incredible. He Yeah, I loved he was probably my favorite confessor I've ever had. And I would go to him just all the time in college and just the spiritual direction he gave me. I'm struggling to come up with any attribute it was individually, which I think just means he's well on his way to being a saint. So there's not much more I could say about that.
Yeah, I feel like I mean, hopefully, the people who watched our interview with him could get that energy coming off of him because that was one of our most watched episodes to date, where he could just fill a room with his energy. He could fill time with any given thought of his could keep going, and it was also authentic. It wasn't like he was trying to preach at you. You could tell that it was just coming from his heart, and you could tell it was authentic because it wasn't always like so clean cut and narrative, and it wasn't like the speech wasn't all laid out, and you could see some of it was coming to him as he was going. And so yeah, I mean that was definitely something that I can relate to, and I'm sure Ryan can as well. Just having, especially any priest, but Father Foley's a good example of it, who's just so lively and energetic and confident humility, I think is a good way of describing like how he went about showing his faith. He didn't shy away from it, and it was definitely out there for everyone to see, but it wasn't in a proud or boastful way. And it just brought an energy that kind of made it exciting to be in that journey with him, or to be in this, even just in the same room.
Yeah, he's a great example, but yeah, all the holiest people I know, there's just a simplicity to their life and to their faith. And, to have someone like a college chaplain who's just day in, day out affronted with the biggest questions, and always it's got to be one crisis after the next with these young people, and just to be able to respond with just complete faith and humility and just trusting God, and also just the simplicity, saying like, yeah, you pray and strive strive to love God, strive to serve God, and do His will, and you don't need to worry about the rest. And yeah, I hope some of that rubs off on me for sure, because I miss Father Foley dearly.
Just makes himself available too. He just
Yeah,
is always fully present with you when you are like, "Hey, Father, I need to chat. I need something. Like, can you please help me with this?" And he just is fully present in that moment with you. Is one of the things I really enjoy.
totally.
So, Jacob, you mentioned earlier that you ended up discerning away from the priesthood and away from religious life and into marriage. So, as Ryan and I know, but as most of, if not entire, our whole audience doesn't know, that you are in fact married. So, what has it been like being married at such a young age by
Yeah,
societal standards these days?
yeah. I'll say too. We kind of were talking about priesthood and stuff because that was part of my story and it's important to talk about. But I will say I was dating my girlfriend and now wife all the way through my senior year of high school and college. So whenever I was going on a seminary visit, I was talking to her about it, my girlfriend at the time. And so I was always constantly discerning the married life as well. And we got married right after college and close to 3 years now married. And I will say I love being married. Married life is such a gift. And, you know, people say, what's funny is we got married right after we graduated because we weren't allowed to get married before that anyway. But we did not get invited to any weddings of people our age for like the first 2 years of our marriage. And we were like, man, what the heck? Are our friends just all not going to get married, or is there some other reason? Within this year, we've been invited to, 10 plus weddings, and it's hard to go to them all. And some of the friends we have that are living by more worldly standards, my wife said something that I thought was profound. She's like, if we were living by the world standards, this is when we probably should have gotten married. And I think she was absolutely right. According to the culture, you should date for a long time, live together before you're married, and marriage isn't something that's serious, and it's something you can do way down the line. But to have a Christian worldview and see that marriage is the gift that it is, why would you want to wait? That's what I would say to anyone who's dating and hitting around that age when they're thinking, "Oh, am I too young to get married?" Say, "You're not." There's so much joy in marriage, and I don't know why you'd want to wait. I think that's the only way I can put it.
What role do you think your faith, or at least your development of your life through your faith, played in not only you being available to get married so young, but also like your commitment that you actually and your faith in the marriage itself that you could get married with not 9 years of dating and all the other stuff that comes with it. Like what put you in that position, you think?
Yeah, it was somewhat reciprocal between uh, at the time girlfriend, because we would kind of realize that we need to start making our faith our own more and more. And we both had kind of different come to Jesus and moments of conversion, even throughout our dating experience. And to have that the anchor for me, not that this is necessary for everyone, but it was helpful for me to be able to say, all right, I would like to get married, but I know I need to be able to grow in my faith because she doesn't want to marry me as I am now. I need to become holier. I need to become more virtuous. I need to become the type of man that will be a good husband one day. And it was, somewhat of a gift, long distance. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone, but we made it work. And since we weren't able to get married until we graduated anyway, thanks to the academy, it really gave us that uh that space where we weren't just completely interdependent on each other. We used our dating and even years of engagement, half a year of engagement, as our last days of singlehood and being a single man and a single woman, and learning to love God and follow Him and grow in virtue all on our own. So that way, when we finally could come together, we were actually ready to be married. And you're never ready, is the other advice I'd say. You're not going to be ready to be married. So just get married, and then you'll learn together, because that's way more fun than trying to figure everything out ahead of time.
How has your marriage impacted your faith? How have you guys grown together since becoming married?
I think that's a good question. I think the biggest thing about having a spouse is they're always with you. they uh they can really ask some of those questions that you kind of suppress in your own mind. Like, oh yeah, like, did you pray today? Like, I didn't see you pray. Like, what, didn't you say you were gonna go to mass today? And so things like that, all the way down to they're seeing you at your best and at your worst. They know you in a way that they can sense when you're, you know, not not giving things in your own life and your own spiritual life the attention they deserve. And if you have that ability to kind of share that with one another and pray for them then and encourage them, I think that is just, I mean, it's like a guardian angel almost, just like who can talk to you and tell you and encourage you to do better and to strive after God. So it's just having someone who knows you better than anyone else, I think would be helpful for anyone's faith journey.
Ryan and I talked about this at one point in an earlier episode, and he put me on the spot, so I get to put you on the spot now. Do you think that more young people should get married younger or should pursue marriage? What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I think, as we've gotten so many wedding invitations this year, I've kind of found myself wondering at questions like that. Should people be getting married earlier? And it's a hard line to draw, because I think the real question behind that is, do people understand what marriage is for and what marriage is and what it means to be a husband or a wife and a father or a mother? And I think that's the bigger question to ask. I I think generally, I think young people should get married sooner than they are. I think in being married and getting married younger, you allow this more space for marriage to be what it is and to live into the vocation and to then begin seeing yourself as a spouse and a father or mother too, as God blesses you with children. I think it'd be better if people got married a little bit younger. I'd say
Yeah.
generally that's the case, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of along the same lines that I had answered when Ryan asked me. It was basically like generally I think it would be, but only if people were thinking about it with the gravity that marriage should be thought about, and not like shying away from that, but like growing to it. Like you had kind of alluded to that when you said that by dating, especially with the space that you guys had, like you thought of it as, okay, I'm not a worthy person for her to marry right now. And not only that, I probably don't deserve to marry her as I am right now. So I need to work on myself to make myself a good person for her. And yeah, like I think I would totally agree with you that people would be better off with that life partner. With that, you alluded to, it's kind of like having a guardian angel, someone who knows you to correct you when you're wrong, who knows when you're kind of dipping in your faith or dipping in your energy and not putting enough to it, and can kind of hold you accountable. But that, as we've seen, that if it's not treated with the proper sincerity and the proper value, then it can get tarnished and ends up ruining people's lives to some extent, or if not to a major extent.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree with all that.
Jacob, when did you know that you wanted to marry your wife? And what was your answer to the question that you just posed for younger couples?
I wanted to marry her right when I started dating her. The moment I knew for sure I was going to marry her came at the end of my junior year in college. That's like when I bought a ring and everything. And it just kind of came from peace and a lot of discernment, and that trusting that this is the woman that God had given to me to be my wife. And it was definitely the fruit of some prayer over the course of those in between years in my college, and just our relationship was really flourishing, I'd say, as we both fully came into our faith and wanted to be a godly husband and wife, and a godly man and woman dating before we got engaged. Even once I saw that we were pursuing holiness together, I knew that I wanted to marry her and actually mean it, and then we could go and do that, and we were ready. Um, what question am I asking young people? And I'm answering.
Just like how to know like what marriage actually is, like what it
Yeah,
entails.
yeah. Honestly, I would say read John Paul II and everything he wrote about. I did a class, and I needed one more class to have the minimum credit requirement my senior year. And so I convinced a philosophy professor to lead me through an independent study where I just told him what I wanted to read, and I would read those books and go talk to him about it once a week. And that was the class. And I got an A. So it was a great class. But I chose to focus on John Paul II, and particularly his work back when he was, before he was a pope, but love and responsibility, what it means to love regardless of whether you're married or not. Starting with that, what does it mean to love someone as other? And then he really gets into the questions of what is marriage? What does it mean that we are man and woman? And what does it mean that we're supposed to come together? What does it mean that marriage is for children? And that is one of the purposes that we get married. And what is the difference between the vocation to a celibate life versus a married life? And like, why are they both beautiful, and why is married life so important to God all throughout the Bible? He steps through all those questions with so much eloquence and so much wisdom that I was really attracted to marriage in a way that I wasn't before that. And I would recommend that to anyone who is dating or even not dating, but thinks they want to get married, or maybe someone doesn't see the need to get married. And he has so much to say to young people and to young couples. I think he's a great resource.
What was the best Saint Pope John Paul II book that you read?
Love and Responsibility. His Carol Wojtyla wrote it before he was pope, but it is pretty dense. So I would recommend, maybe there's I want to say anything that Christopher West wrote about either Theology of the Body or summarizing John Paul II's work. I don't have any names come to mind right away. But if you look up Christopher West, any of his resources are very easy to digest and read for anyone of any experience level. But then if you really are interested in hearing straight from the horse's mouth, I loved Love and Responsibility.
So, Jacob, we are in the thick of it when it comes to the season of Lent. I'm sure Ryan agree that one of your famous lines in college was just the phrase, "Offer it up."
Offer it up.
Offer it up. So you walked me, well, not me as an interpersonal relationship, but you were the leader of the group that took us through the first Exodus 90 group at the academy, and I was a part of it while you were leading. And if I'm not mistaken, Ryan, you also went through it with Jacob, right?
Next year, the year
The
after
next
you.
year, right, yeah, yeah. So can you talk us through your experience with one Exodus 90 and two your famous line offered up and what that really means to you?
Yeah, that was a great turning point for me too, because that year I did it with you, John. That first year was my first year as well, and it always something that attracted me, just because a group of young men doing hard things, like who doesn't want that? But it was particularly relevant for me because I noticed a tendency that I still have to this day, but I noticed very acutely in college, and that was if I was having a bad day, something wasn't going my way, I was sad, grumpy, angry, depressed, then my solution was consistently to either get a Dr. Pepper and some snacks or whatever, or to watch a movie and to just kind of zone out or, doom scroll. Any of the options that are easily identifiable as not healthy coping mechanisms, those are what was turning to. And I just recognized in myself that I don't have the discipline to just do things like that sometimes and to not get away with it. I know that for me, I need to have periods in my life at least where I completely cut things out. And I saw Exodus 90 as an opportunity to do that, where, on the good days, Exodus 90 is not that hard. Like, you're just kind of living your life. Maybe you're busy with work or whatever, and it's just another day. But when you have a horrible day, you didn't sleep well, you had a horrible start to your day, someone said something mean, you got bad news from family or something like that, that's when you're started to you'd be tempted to, turn toward the creature comforts of the world. And Exodus 90 created a space where, guess what? There are no creature comforts you're allowed to have. That was very important for me in my faith because it forces you to cut out those things that are getting in the way and are obstacles between your dependence on God. And when you cut those out in your lowest moments and in your highest moments, you have no choice but to turn to prayer for strength. And yeah, offer it up was my way of doing that because it was my way of saying this is hard and it it's not going to be something I want to solve with creatures and with worldly and fleshly desires, desires of the flesh. It's is a way to is an easy way for me to remind myself that there is value in suffering, not only for my own self and virtue formation, and that it turns me to God when I suffer, as to not enjoy some creature comforts, but also the idea of, intercessional prayer and redemptive suffering. And my suffering can be offered up to God on behalf of someone else or some intention. And to really see that as a joy, like the joy in suffering, suffering's not joyful if you're just gritting and bearing it like, David Goggins or whatever, like just doing hard things because you hate yourself. Like, there's no joy in that. But doing joy, knowing, or doing hard things and suffering, and then reflecting and offering up those hardships to God, and in conjunction with Christ's sacrifice on the cross and his passion and his whole earthly life, you allow yourself a little taste of that, the grace that is coming from that that suffering and that you're meriting on behalf of yourself or whoever you're praying for. So offer it up was a common refrain through Exodus 90 because I never quite cut the desire for Dr. Pepper, but I
It's
used,
also a common line at the retreats.
yeah.
I think my favorite offer it up moment probably came when they stopped bringing us water in the Weedy house.
Yeah, the Weedy House.
I tried.
When the water was cut off, and they were like, "But you can drink Gatorade," and we were like, "No."
No, we refused that Gatorade over my dead body. No,
Oh
yeah.
my goodness. One of my favorite memories of doing Exodus 90. I mean, I think that first year is the only year I've done the full experience Exodus 90. I've done Exodus 40 or little bits and pieces here and there, but that first full year, I remembered you explaining the rules to us. Um, Mind you, I got into this little group without fully knowing what I was subjecting myself to, but I was like, well, I'm in now.
That was my strategy.
Yeah, so we showed up to the first full group meeting and you were reading the rules and you're like, you got to the point where it's like, and of course, Sundays aren't days of Lent, so we can pick as a group, we can pick one thing. I'm choosing we're going to only do one thing rather than, we'll just hands free, like you can do whatever you want on Sunday. No, we're going to only give up one thing. And at that, whatever the one thing we give up was, we're only giving up like for a portion. So if it was, you can't have any sodas or like sugary drinks, if that was the rule, and we chose as a group to relax that one on Sunday, you're like, okay, you get one drink. It's not the whole day. And then whether it was like video games, it's like you can play for an hour, and that's that the one that was hard off the limits, never to be touched or given up on Sundays, was the cold showers.
Never.
I was like, why?
Yeah. That first cold shower after your warm shower is impossible. That's why I knew that could not be an option. And
Oh my goodness.
that I remember too the great debate of whether a milkshake counts as a sweet drink or a dessert. It's always a hot topic on Exodus
Yeah.
Sundays.
Or whether a protein shake was a vital
Oh
meal
yeah.
after a workout.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love doing that with both you guys and all those guys that we did it in college. Great times. I especially remember, COVID restrictions and we couldn't do anything other than just hang out and talk on a Friday night. And that was great. Couldn't have done without you guys for sure.
Yeah, good memories, good memories. It's where I learned the famous game Coup, which tortured our friendship group for many years.
I'm impressed you guys are still friends after all those games you played.
Where's the fourth Duke? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Double contested strategy is still a goat tier strategy.
No, my favorite was Double Ambassador.
Okay. See, I always just lie about having an ambassador.
I know, but when I controlled two of them and saw the whole deck, then we
Yeah,
got away with that.
that's true.
Oh man, is so Jacob, I don't know. There may have only been one or two episodes so far that have passed by on our relatively short history where your name hasn't been brought up. So you're quite famous. Is there anything you've got to say to the people, or any thoughts you'd like to share that either we didn't bring up or you're interested in or very passionate for you?
Well, let me think. Think what God's been teaching me, at least in this calendar year, is humility in the sense that we don't need to go out and strive for great success, for positions of honor, for even being known by a lot of people. I think, a lot of people who know us would be in really high paced military jobs or other careers. And um, there's always that desire to be successful, to make a lot of money, to meet a lot of friends and be popular amongst those friends. And I think the Lord's been humbling me in this season of Lent and this year especially, and really trying to remind me the value of the hidden life. Saints are made when no one's looking, and Jesus, Mary, and Joseph lived 30 years before Jesus went out and began his ministry. By doing that, he redeemed the hidden life of doing your job, you know, taking the lower place, submitting to authority and those above you, embracing spiritual poverty, all these things. And being able to learn that, I think, is going to help us a lot. So, everyone who's listening, I hope you can learn the easy way, because the way of humility is humiliation, and that's sometimes the only way to learn it. I hope we can all learn from Jesus' hidden life and his example and the saints before getting to that point ourselves.
Thank you, Ryan. So, anything else that you?
I don't have anything else. This was great.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you so much. And like I said, I don't know if we've gone more than 2 episodes without bringing you up in some capacity. So thank you for the impact you've had on both of our lives. You deserve to know that it's been meaningful, and that we probably wouldn't be doing this in some small part without you. So I want to give you your thank you and your flowers now. And thanks for coming on today. And hopefully we can make this a recurring visit.
Yeah, praise God, and thanks. I pray for you guys all the time. Just want you to know that also, that you had the same impact on me. So those good old days are still formative for me as well. So thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're interested in more videos, click right here, and we'll see you in the next one. God bless.